Richard here with Clutches and Crafts Plus. This video is a follow-up to my rant about previous ShopSmith owners. This is going to be more of a rant about ShopSmith, the company. If you are new to the channel, please take a moment to consider subscribing. If you are one of my few subscribers, thanks for hanging with me. I had this set up to get it as close to alignment as I could, and I was struggling. But at the time, I had realized that there were no shims under the table and I needed to order them. So I ordered them. I got sidetracked with my Naughty Frog project because it didn't require supreme accuracy. I went through that whole project. I didn't want to stop to do this in the middle of that. I've come full circle back around now. I had my shims. I used some of the tips from Scott on my growth rings about using the sanding disc high spot in the aid of the shimming process. But in this time frame, I am a bit of a research person and I'm trying to find instructions from ShopSmith on how to do the shims. And I find it strange that I can't find it. And I was under the impression from when I had the Big Joe that these things came loose in a box and you had to assemble them, and that would be why things would be wrong. So once I got the ShopSmith, this is the original manual that came with it when it was a Mark V 510 before the rails were upgraded. And then I have a full manual. I never bothered to look for one before. And it shows this being in a box already assembled. Pulling the table out, already assembled. So now I'm confused. Are the shims something that the owners were expected to do, or did it come from the factory? And that is the reason why there are no explanations on the process for shimming, because I have a real problem with trying to do all the alignments using a table and a sanding disc that hasn't been shimmed. Because let's say you do all that, you set all those things, and then you move to the upright position and you realize you need to shim. Now suddenly, for one thing, your 90 sets like this aren't going to be accurate anymore because you're raising one end off of them, okay? Because I found used shims in the box with miscellaneous pieces with the Mark 510 parts, the tubes, the locking screws and whatnot. So now my picture is developed that this had shims on it. The second owner removed them out of lack of understanding or knowledge, did not return them, so I had to re-shim them. And at that time, I was convinced it was my lack of knowledge or ability to get it to be perfectly aligned. So, having upped my level of measurement and accuracy to really try and eliminate as many things as possible, I'm finally like, well, wait a second. This is very much like the problems I had with my Big Joe. The table was never something that could have been aligned. No previous owner could have ever done it. I had to grind the castings for the trunnions to get the table to have enough movement side to side, both in the front and the back, to actually achieve parallel. I'm dumbfounded as to how this is possible. This is two trunnions, both steel, front and back. The only thing I can guess is that the holes for the table themselves are actually either too far apart or too close together in the back, because look at this. I'm loose, super loose. That's the play I have in the front to work with for alignment. I got next to nothing in the back. I mean, almost nothing back there. I can't do anything about the table. Can't move those holes, so now I get the joy of taking it apart again to modify and grind out and verify, figure out whatever it is that's going on with this back trunnion to give me the extra movement that I need, because it doesn't matter how far, which direction, one way or the other, I could never get this one out far enough. This one will never go out as far, and I was always rubbing hard with my scratch pen. I'll address when I come back to that comments people, well, if it's rubbing like that, you might have bearing issues. Look, you can turn this and put your set screw in a different spot very lightly and then do all the same things and it will still rub in the same spots. I even put it on this end and it's still rubbed in all the same spots. It's not my bearings or any of that. I don't turn the disc like everybody does in their videos because you have some play. I use a chuck on the other end, so I'm not moving the actual movable parts. And I also have some objections about the fact that the manuals show you using a saw to do alignment. Like, I have an old one, I'm like, okay, maybe it's old, right? No, the new ones still show a saw. They made their own video showing a sanding disc and marking the high spot and using it. Very old, very blurry video. It's common knowledge enough. Scott has a video on it, but there's nothing in the manual. Download them all. Mark 10, 510, the Mark 520s, which is all the oldest ones they sell now, style. That manual, the 7, Mark 7. It has one picture of the Mark 7 with these beautiful rails on it at the very beginning, and everything else is all the original drawings. Pictures of tables with the 500 guide on it with no tubes. All the other instructions on how to assemble it are all based on outdated 510 model drawings with tubes, which, you know, hides the fact, complaints by other users that this big thing is wonderful, it keeps it straight, but you can't see your angles. Okay, it doesn't address the fact that the saw blade and the sanding disc are not perfectly straight, and it tries to do all these things assuming that the table is straight. And again, somebody have to tell me, is this thing shimmed from the table from the factory? And then they want to tell you, well, if you're going to adjust it to do your alignments, that they want you to turn it to 45, because this is the only way that all of your Allens are nice and easily accessible, which is, to me, is ridiculous, especially when you're trying to deal with doing the leveling or shimming, which again they don't talk about, because you have to take this off. So there's no real way. Like, if you take this off, the bolts are underneath, they fall out. You're supposed to set shims on the holes and push it up through there. No. This is what I did. I left it in this position, and I tried shimming it flat like this, but I realized very quickly that when I got close, the second I flipped it up under its own weight into the vertical position, this sags under its own weight. You cannot set this shimming here. It needs to be in the upright position, because that's essentially what you're designing for, is to drill on a flat surface. But let's see if we can bring you around here real quick. When it's in the 90s, this one's easy to get to, but this one, an Allen will not fit through this hole and turn, because it will just barely slide through on that flat and not have enough room to turn, which is silly to me. This angled portion is your braking surface. This flat portion here is not. All I did was take a Dremel and barely knock a little groove right there on both of them. So now I can stick my Allen straight in here and adjust it, loosen it all I want from this position. That is beneficial for another reason. Because if you're like me and what seems to be every other ShopSmith owner, and your table's not shimmed, you'll need to take this off. But the only way that keeps these bolts really as safely in place without them wanting to fall out just because, you know, it's upside down or some other goofy angle, was for me to do this. This piece of wood just happens to be the right size to support the table with the knockout hole dead center on the sanding disc, so that I didn't have to move things drastically. My 90s were locked. I was absolutely certain that they were right, because if it's tilted this way or the other, you'll think that, oh, well, I need to shim one or the other. No, these shims need to be exactly the same on both sides, front to back. You're shimming this way, not this way. You need to have these things adjusted properly. And to get that, to be sure that was straight, I'll show you in a minute. But when you're here, now suddenly, all your bolts can actually stay in their holes without falling out, as long as you don't push them back with your table. And with my sanding disc behind it, my table is not at risk of falling back crazy. This is the benefit. Square up. Look, this one's kiltered because it was already loose. But your bolts, you can put your shims on. I have some stuck to the table. And they're gonna stay. I don't have to monkey with trying to hold them in place or anything else like that. And then to be sure, for the best accuracy, because I didn't like the idea that I was relying on an uneven, unreliable, unshimmed, unleveled table to ensure my 90s. I'm turning it so that my low spots, my most perpendicular surfaces are here, holding everything into place and alignment, looking at my disc. Alright, I pulled my shims and washers off because I was knocking them around and I didn't have them there when I did this first time. I'm just trying to demonstrate. And this is, overkill. I'm sure a lot of what I do is overkill. But I didn't trust that they were level to each other because I've had so many problems with the castings in the first place. So now I'm relatively confident that they're level. And now if I were done with my shimming and confident I was moving forward, I just put my bolts back in, put my washers on there, and with the wood shim, they're lined up. I don't have to lift it up to line them up. I literally just barely get it threaded and get it going and it starts to pull in. But in my case, I want to put these back up and figure out why I have a tiny amount of play in the back and a major amount of play in the front, and I have a suspicion I'm going to find that by measuring my stud pattern on the bottom of the table. In my mind, the best way to do this is just to put the bolts in and measure my outsides of my heads. Or 1/16. Full and 5/64. That's a pretty significant. These are much wider. Especially if it's just enough to really screw these trundles. Aha, and the back trundles have a tiny hole. The front ones are a significantly larger hole. Like, what the hell? I don't get it. You explain to me why you do it. All the bolts are the same. Why you would give this such a small amount of play? I thought it was the table, but no. I mean, just look at it. We are at 25, 3/8 inch hole, and a 1/2 inch hole. There's no way I can move the back far enough to adjust this and actually get it in alignment. So (15/64) 3/16. Alright, well, clearly they were comfortable with having a little bit of meat in the back and the front. And this is really infuriating. So this is your front, right? That you can barely see because there's usually a rail in the way. This is your stop for your 60, and here's your scale. This is the front, and it has a bigger hole. Now you explain to me why the back item. I'm just going to take my phone off. This in. is literally the same piece. They don't even bother making a different one. They just don't put the stop on it, and it doesn't have a indicator, but it still has the same scale. And yet, it does not have the same holes. ShopSmith. Okay, now it's time to try and work on correcting the mistakes of a major American corporation. I'm not sure I want to go straight at it with a 1/2 inch hole. I think this might be a good time for a taper. Oh yeah, and an apron. Alright, that's good enough. In my mind, there's just absolutely no reason why you'd have smaller holes in the back. I'd be curious to see a response from anybody if anybody important enough to have an answer or knows from actual ShopSmith might actually take the time to watch this video. I'd be curious as to know what the excuse is, other than cutting corners and not wanting to drill a bigger hole. That's all I can figure. That is all that I can figure, because even the hole for the Allen wrench is a 1/2 inch hole on both sides. Only these were skipped. That is not assembly, that is manufacturing. I'm very much a man who uses what he has on hand. See? Like, how much money did you save by skimping on a 1/2 inch hole? Alright. Now I should have loads of room. And this. So we're having that perfect piece of wood adjusted to just the right height will help. Going back in with my predetermined shims, which here, no big deal about it. Let's show why. Because we can just do that. Now granted, at the time I didn't realize why this side did not fall out as easily as that side. The bottom ones stay well because they rest inside the arc. The top ones, well, as you see. I highly recommend putting the fattest, thickest, most durable washer on the outside, because it will be resting against these portions of the casting. Sorry, my cameraman hasn't been hired yet. Now I opted to go one extra thousandths washer on all four because I'm raising this side, and I knew that basically I'd end up putting this end on its edge, and I just used the shim to help make up a little bit of space under there and help try and keep it from being as flush. Maybe I don't need it, but. And all this just makes me wonder why, if these holes are okay, we couldn't manage to just see a few more holes on top where we can actually put these bolts in from above. Alright, now let's remove our temporary support and bask in the glory of the room that we needed. Now here because we did it, not because ShopSmith did. So, now we can move on to the other aspects of this, and I can hopefully finally get this thing perfectly aligned without fighting it, and we can maybe make another video talking about that as well.